This week's Parsha, the portion of Shoftim, the Torah tells us there's a positive commandment that every Jewish community must have a court, what we call a Bezdin, which is comprised of judges of a certain qualification, and each community must have law enforcers to enforce the verdicts and the rulings of the court. Everybody should silence their computers, please. Judges and law enforcers, you should place in every one of your communities, which God is giving to your tribes, and the court will judge the people a judgment of righteousness, of justice. So there's an obvious question. What is the discerning characteristic between a human being and any other living creature, species? Every living species, its function is based on instinct. The DNA of each species causes that species has another instinctive behavior. The lion, the tiger, the bear, the fish, whatever it is, its function is exactly based on its DNA makeup, and that's the way it behaves in all aspects of its function. But yet a human being has free choice. Although we do have certain instinctive behavior, but choice is able to override whatever the instinct may be. And a human being can behave whatever way he chooses to behave. It's interesting, the Talmud tells us that species that procreate during the daytime give birth during the daytime. Species which procreate at nighttime give birth at nighttime. The human being who could procreate at any time of the day, therefore, regardless of when they cohabit, the child can be born either day or night. But a living species that procreates, it only procreates when instinctively it's meant to, whether it's day or nighttime, and it's based on the species. Now, why did God endow the human being with free choice, what we call free will? The Gemara tells us, the Talmud tells us, two locations. Hakol b'dei shamayim chutz b'Yerushalayim. Everything is predestined except one sphere of God. And the Gemara explains, when a child is about to be conceived, an angel takes that droplet of semen before God, and God pronounces on that droplet of semen every aspect of the destiny of that child. Chacham tipesh, wise or foolish. Gibor cholosh, strong, weak. Oshironi, wealthy or poor? Yes. Come on. Hello. I know it's 1 o'clock. So every pronouncement is made on that droplet of semen. So the Gemara asks, what about tzaddik Rosha? What about the pronouncement of tzaddik, righteous, and evil? Why is that pronouncement made on that droplet of semen? To determine what the future of that child will be. So the Gemara answers, Hakol b'dei shamayim chutz b'Yerushalayim. Everything's predestined except one's choice. And every human being has the choice, has the ability either to be the tzaddik or to be the Rasha, or to be the evil one. As a result of that, if a person chooses to do a good deed, that good deed is attributed to him because it's only due to his initiative that he did that good deed. And if the person chose to do something which is classified as transgression, as sinful, that action is attributed to him because that's free choice. And that's the discerning characteristic between a human being and any other living creature, species. Every species, instinct dictates its behavior, every aspect of its being. A human being, free choice, is an integral part of our function. How, in what direction we go. So you would say, if that's the case, let man have free reign on his life. But the Torah says differently. Every community must have a judicial system, has to have a court, a rabbinic court comprised of the highest echelon of qualified judges and law enforcers, that they will enforce the verdicts and the decisions of that court. Now, let's understand. How many people have to live in a community that on a Torah level, they're required to have a court? One opinion is if you have 120 Jews living in a community, that community is required to have a court of 3, a court of 23, that can even adjudicate and give verdicts regarding the death penalty. One of the opinions, even as few as 120 people. Another opinion says no, it has to be 240 people. But 240 people is not a large community. So if you have every community that has as few people as 240 people, has a rabbinic court with law enforcers. Now what happens? A Jew is not permitted to eat meat that's not ritually slaughtered. And if you eat what we call a kazayas of that non-kosher meat, which is the volume of an olive, and you're forewarned by witnesses, and you cross that line, what is the level of liability? Lashes. What are lashes? If the person physically is able to survive 39 lashes, gets 39 lashes. That's with a whip. You realize if a person is whipped to that degree, the man is incapacitated for at least 2-3 years to recover from that whipping. And if he's evaluated for less, of course, if he's going to die under the whip, he's not, we don't give it to that degree. But factually, he's compromised very severely. Who in his right mind will eat the volume of a kazayas, the volume of an olive, not kosher meat, with this level of consequence, with this reaction of the court? The person would have to be totally unbalanced. You'd have to be totally irrational. What about if you violate Shabbos, God forbid, which carries the liability of death penalty? And you're forewarned, and there's a court who's able to implement that decision immediately and to carry it out. Who's going to put his life in jeopardy? It's not worth it. Even if he does it for the wrong reason, but it's not worth it. My life is too precious. So if that is the case, if we have a rabbinic court, or it's qualified even to render rulings on the death penalty, on lashes, penalty, who in his right mind is going to cross those lines? So rather than enhancing one's free choice by creating the system of judges and law enforcers, God is actually limiting our free choice. He's curtailing our free choice. But a free choice, that's what it's all about. And I said, that's the reason why there's liability and there's deservingness, because it's only due to your initiative. God has really put handcuffs on us. He's limited our free choice. So how do we understand it? Person raises a child. A parent brings a child into this world. You're responsible to raise that child responsibly, appropriately. Like the Mishnah tells us, a father has an obligation to circumcise his child. A father has an obligation to teach his child Torah. You have to teach your child a profession because he has to be able to earn a livelihood. You're obligated to teach your child how to swim because if a person can't swim, God forbid, he could drown. So these are the obligation a parent has on a child. If he's a firstborn, you have to redeem him after 30 days, what we call pidyon haben. A father has responsibility to be responsible to his child. A child reaches adolescence, and the child says to the father, you know something? I'm going to see the wild blue yonder. And the father understands. At this age, if he's exposed to many of those influences in society, he's taking his child and throwing him to the dogs, putting it mildly. His child would become a corrupted human being, a subhuman being. And the father would not allow it. He says, you know, when you're 18, you can make your own decision. Even then, I hope you will listen and be rational. Parent doesn't allow the child to do that. Understanding what the child says, you know something? I'm bar mitzvah, I have free choice. I can do anything I want. It's true, you can do anything you want. But the father, if he has any level of control over that child's life, he will not allow that child to do anything irresponsible, anything that's detrimental to that child. Who are we? Who are the Jewish people? God says, you're my children. B'ni b'chori Yisrael. You're the equivalent of my firstborn. If God is our father and he's the king, what are we? We're the princes. The prince wants to play in the mud with all the commonest children. The king says, you know something? It's not appropriate. I will not allow it. God says to the Jewish people, indulging in non-kosher meat or other levels of behavior, which is contrary to your spiritual makeup, and to be able to address your potential, I will not allow it. I will not tolerate it. Because you have greater things ahead of you that you have to address. So setting up the judicial system with a law enforcement system, what does that do? It puts the fear of God into people. Now that the fear of God is within you, now you behave a certain way within a certain context. So how does your free choice now manifest itself? Not do I eat not kosher or do I yes eat kosher? Do I violate Shabbos or not? That's not part of the equation. God says, I will not allow that even to be brought to the forefront of consideration. You know what your choice now is? When you celebrate the Shabbos, do you celebrate it with the focus that this is to commemorate creation when I entered into existence? Or it's a day to sleep away? Because like people used to say, if not, thank God there's a Shabbos, because otherwise I couldn't survive the future week. It's a day of rest. God rested, you're going to rest. You're going to rest and be sure you're going to waste the day away. Just whittle it away with nothing. So as a result of that, that's not called an infringement on our free choice. There's enough area. It's wide enough to make choices that we're able to exercise our ability to make choices to be the tzaddik of the Russia. I mean, the beliefs, person becomes a heretic. That's choice. Even though they're confirming proofs, irrefutable proofs, that God is the creator. But you realize it's all up to each individual person, whether he wants to buy it or not buy it, whether you want to deal with it or you want to just turn a blind eye on it and stick with your heretical beliefs and heretical position. That's choice. Now, the Chofetz Chaim writes, said something phenomenal in one location. And really, there's a Sibsech Chum says the same thing. We find that Paro, the first 5 plagues, which were revealed miracles, Paro turned his back on God. The next 5 subsequent plagues, it says God hardened the heart of Paro. He no longer had choice, free choice. So the Rambam writes, why? Because choice is a privilege. Once you abuse the privilege, God withdraws the privilege. So today, why don't you have free choice? Because you forfeited the right to have choice. That's why you no longer have choice. Rashi cites the Sishcham, and Rashi explains it a little differently. Let's say Paro would have been given the choice and he would choose to send us out. And despite ultimately, because he couldn't deal with it any longer, due to the pressure, he sends us out, and then God goes then and destroys the Egyptian people. So people ask the question, why did he destroy them? They did tshuva, they repented, they sent them out. Why are you destroying them? Because the people don't know the truth. Maybe the reason why he sent them out was under duress because they had no choice. They couldn't tolerate the pain any longer. God gave them the wherewithal, despite the overwhelming trauma and pain, to hold steadfast and not let them out. Because if he would have let them out and then punish him, it would have been a desecration of God's name. It would have been Chil Hashem. Why are you punishing them? They let them out. Therefore, God withheld his choice that people should understand what kind of bad person he was and how evil he was. Despite all the obviousness of God's presence, the man deserves to be beaten to a pulp. So that's why God withheld the choice. Because if God would punish him, which only deserves that punishment, how do you take innocent people for 210 years and enslave them? You deserve to be destroyed for that alone. But people say, well, he's a benevolent king. Why are you punishing him so harshly? But if the man himself behaves when God is obvious with a level of arrogance not to be believed, then people understand he deserves to have his wings cut and he deserves to be rained in upon. It's a whole different reality. So the Chofetz Chaim writes, we find at the time of the Haskalah movement, the Enlightenment movement, people from the best families, they ceased observing Judaism. It was unheard of that a person came from an observant family would eat pork and non-kosher meat. These people ate pork, non-kosher meat. These people stopped putting on tefillin. These people stopped observing the Shabbos. These people deliberately would wear a combination of wool and linen. They threw out the baby with the water. They tossed everything out the window. What Hashem allowed this to happen? It's such a chil Hashem. God should have intervened a little bit, give him a greater level of clarity. So he explains the Chofetz Chaim because ultimately, at the final day of judgment, when everybody will be resurrected to be judged, to go be part of eternity or destroyed, all these people who wore the tefillin, ate kosher, observed the Shabbos, you know what God's going to do with them? God's going to punish them and send them to oblivion. People say, but it doesn't make sense. Why? They were observant all these years. They may have been devout, but they were observant. Because people don't understand. They're only observant because they have no choice. They were forced to do it because they were part of the community. But if they themselves are able to override the community, then people understand why they deserve to be destroyed. How do you violate the Shabbos? How do you eat not kosher? How do you do all this? Now people understand. But because he would have punished them without their transgressions, people would say, it doesn't make any sense. Why is God doing it? And that would have been a chil Hashem. Always mentioned the Talmud in two locations states that a judge who's done din emes lamito, a judge who renders a truthful judgment, a truthful verdict. God says, I consider you my partner in creation. A judge who renders a truthful verdict. So Tosfos, who's the commentator on the page, asks, it should say, Kol adon din emes. Emes is truthful. What's din emes labito? It's unquestionably truthful. But what's the difference? Truthful or unquestionably truthful? Now, what is evidence in court? Evidence is only witnesses. Testimony of qualified witnesses, that's credible evidence. Now, witnesses to be credible evidence, what process do they undergo? They have to undergo an interrogation process. The court asks certain questions to the two witnesses, and if their responses are acceptable and there's no discrepancy between the two witnesses, the testimony is accepted as credible evidence. Let's say after asking all the questions, the judge feels that there's something not right. These witnesses seem to be something off. Maybe they rehearsed it, maybe they did this, but it seems to be, it's not what they want to say. Then the judge has an obligation to remove himself from the case because he has a sense there's something not right. That's the meaning. Din emes lamito. If he renders a judgment which is unquestionably truthful, there was not a question in his mind that this was credible, then he's God's partner in creation. And if not, God says, I will take your soul. I will kill you. If you offer a corrupt judgment, I will take your soul, even for a penny. So the question is, a person steals $1 million and he's a thief. God doesn't take his soul for stealing $1 million. But within the context of the court, if the judge, due to his illegal verdict, a man had to pay a penny which he shouldn't have paid, God says, I will take your soul. Why is the God's reaction to the court much more severe than to the thief who steals $1 million? Now, there's a midrash which I mentioned in the past. Originally, when God created the world, the appellation for God is Elohim. What is the appellation of Elohim? Elohim is the attribute of justice. Bereshis bara Elohim, the beginning Elohim created. V'yomer Elohim, Elohim said Yor. It's always Elohim, Elohim. The original intent of creation was through the attribute of justice. But when God saw that man couldn't survive that attribute because man is prone to fail and the world ultimately would have to be destroyed, God coalesced into existence the attribute of mercy. Because being that exacting, man couldn't survive it. However, we find that the attribute of justice is crucial for the function of existence. So although the protocol of divine justice is not going to be implemented, but minimally you have to have human justice, that people are going to be culpable for their behavior. That's human justice. Because you have to have din, you have to have justice in place. So it's true, divine justice not, but human justice, yes. What happens if the judge on the moral level fails? And there is no human justice. God forbid, that means you have to have divine justice. If you have divine justice, there's no telling what the fallout's going to be. How many people are going to die? So when the judge renders an illegal verdict, even for a penny, what's he doing? He's upsetting the system because only there is no divine justice when there's human justice. But if there's no human justice, and who do we attribute the lack of human justice to the judge? Because he's a corrupt person. As a result of that, he's the cause of divine justice being implemented into existence. Therefore, God says, I will take his soul for this irresponsible, evil behavior that all the casualties, all the suffering in the world is due to this one individual. If a person has a case, he has a claim against a person, and he wants to go to court, and he has two courts to go to. One court, the presiding judge is a greater Torah sage, and the other court, a lesser Torah sage. But they're both definitely qualified judges. But it's a simple case. It's not that complicated. Which court you should go to? So tzedek tirdov means you should go to the more qualified court. But your case, even the lesser court is qualified. Nevertheless, go to the more qualified court. If you go to the more qualified court, the greater Torah sage go to that. The question is why? If the lesser court is as qualified as the greater court, because we're not talking about over here any level of genius which is needed, why go to the greater court? Now, there's a very interesting Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah writes that based on a midrash, the chavivim divrei sofer miyeni shel Torah. If a person doesn't violate a Torah law, what level of reverence or fear of God does it display? A certain degree. Why don't you violate the Torah law? Because God said not. So by not refraining is a demonstration of fear of God, because that's the reason why you didn't cross that line. What about not violating a rabbinic law? A rabbinic law is not a Torah law. It's basically a fence. If you observe a rabbinic law, it is a greater declaration of fear of God than observing a Torah law. Because you know why? The Torah law person says, it's understandable. That's God's word. Therefore, I will not violate it. I will make a fence not to violate it. But not to violate a rabbinic fence, why aren't you violating it? There's nothing innately wrong with what you're doing. The answer is because you never know. If I violate it, now that I haven't kept my distance, my arm's length, I'm closer, and there's a greater likelihood that I may cross that line on the Torah level. Therefore, I prefer to be arm's length many steps away from there, that even if I violate the law, at worst I'm violating a rabbinic law, I'm not violating a Torah law. So Rabbeinu Yonah writes that all mitzvahs themselves are like a precursor to the essence of Judaism, which is the fear of God himself, revering God himself. That's Rabbeinu Yonah. If you have a choice to go to a more advanced court, a lesser court, but the second court also meets the criteria of a valid court, you're better off going to the greater court if you can. Why? It's an ordinary, it's a boilerplate case. So why not? The answer is that by going to the best of the best, that indicates where it's not necessary. Because you never know, there's always at some level some degree of human error. Somebody could make a mistake. I want to have the best chance that no mistake will be made. Although I have a right, but I want to have the best chance. Therefore, go to the best court you can go to. That those judges have the greatest degree of integrity, where it's unquestioned that their ruling will be fully in conformance with all the criteria of what a valid verdict is. That's tzedek tirdov. Pursue righteousness, even though you have a court in your own community and you have to go out of the community, go to the other community. Rashi cites the Gemara that it says that the judges, they should render mishpat tzedek, a righteous judgment. Now, to issue a righteous judgment, the judge has to be qualified, has to be pretty well learned, and has to have a certain degree of experience. You may mean well, but if the judgment is wrong, it's wrong. The verdict has to be a correct verdict. So therefore it says the judges that you appoint to preside over the community on the panel, they should be able to render a righteous judgment. It's not, I meant well. No, it's based on your understanding. And based on your understanding, you could have ruled a righteous judgment. So at least now go through the remnants of the case, and maybe you'll be able to poke some holes in it, and therefore the person will be able to be accommodated to a greater degree. So what kind of judge do you need? You need the most credible judge. Well, people, he did me a favor. I'm going to push him in as the judge. There's no such thing. The Gemara tells us, what is the signet of God? God's signet is truth. Anything which is contrary to that doesn't hold water. God will not tolerate. Therefore, the judges have to be qualified to guarantee that whatever decision they render is a truthful decision. Because, ignorance may be bliss, but it's not truthful. Therefore, the Torah tells us, appointing a judge who's not qualified, it's like planting the idolatrous tree right next to the altar in the sanctuary of the Beis Hamikdash. Because what does idolatry say? God is not the supreme being. There are other powers who can behave independent of God. That's what it is. It's Midrash. Something we say every morning in Psukim de Zimra. On Shoftim Shotrim, we say every morning in the Halukos, this after Ashrei, Magid Vorov LeYaakov, Chokov Mishpatav Yisrael. God told over his words to Yaakov and his statutes and his rational laws to the Jewish people. It says Magid Vorov, his words. Elu Divrei Torah. The words is referring to the Torah. Chukov Ela Medrashos. Those are the interpretations. Mishpatav Elu Adinim. Mishpatav are the laws. Lo Nozna Kodesh Baruch Hu as a Torah as a Mishpatim. God only communicated the Torah and its laws El Yisrael B'Levod, only to the Jewish people. Minayat Atolamed. Sheish Lam Ezek Zem Zer. Because we have relevance with one another. If a non-Jew has relevance, has business to do with a Jew, the Jew is not permitted to go to the non-Jewish court to adjudicate a dispute between them. You have to go to a Jewish court. So the nations of the world, one of the 7 Noahide laws is establishing a judicial system. So what do you mean, Mishpatim Bal Yudoim? What does it mean? They're ignorant about the laws. What do you mean? They have Supreme Court justices. They have laws. They have protocols. So what do you mean? They're not fully adept in the laws. So it says, these are the refined points of justice. What is that? When you interrogate witnesses, the interrogation process, to ask very specific questions, to guarantee that the testimony is accurate, this doesn't exist by the non-Jewish court. In a Jewish court, what's credible evidence? You have to have 2 qualified witnesses who are not related to any of the defendants. A non-Jewish court, even a single witness is sufficient. A single judge is sufficient. You don't have to meet many criteria. One doesn't even have to be forewarned. What does that mean? We have, on the Torah level, we rely on probability. And you have a right to rely on probability. If you have 10 butcher shops in their community, and 9 are kosher, 1 is not kosher, you find meat in the street, are you permitted to presume the meat is kosher meat? course, probability, it's 9-1 probability, we say the meat is kosher meat. That the meat came from a kosher shop. But yet, when it comes to testimony in court, it has to be beyond any doubt. Probability is not enough. You have to have 3 judges, minimally. You have to have 2 credible witnesses. You need interrogation, meaning we don't leave anything to chance. It has to be verified and confirmed beyond any doubt. That what? The man is innocent or guilty. That's what it is. So, but by the non-Jew, not. The Duke mitzvahs, the refinements, the guarantees to come upon absolute truth, that's not important by the non-Jew. He's able to render a verdict, even to take a life based on a single witness, even though if the witness is related. Among Jews, not. Now, who's responsible for existence? The Jew or the non-Jew? The Jew is responsible for all existence. We are a global people. The whole world exists. Bereshit bara Elokim, because for the objective that there should be Jewish people. Our actions, their ramifications touch the whole world. The Gemara tells us that if we brought 70 oxen on Sukkot, every ox we bring corresponds to one of the 70 root nations. So the Talmud says that if they would know that all that blessing comes from the sacrifice they brought on Sukkot, and other good things come to them, they would have encircled the temple with legions of soldiers to protect it for them. But because they didn't appreciate its value, not only did they not protect it, they destroyed it. That's what they did. Did they have an understanding and appreciation for spirituality? No. As a result of that, a single witness is sufficient. The Baal Yudom. Many things we have to meet, they don't have to meet. Now the question is why? Now, who's responsible for existence? Whose behavior, its ramifications, touches every part of existence? It's only the Jew. So therefore, as a result of this, probability is not enough. As we said, if there's justice on the terrestrial level, there's no divine justice. What is justice? Is justice probability? It's more than probability. And as a result of that, anything less than that is not acceptable. There's a midrash. There was a certain Amora, he was a rabbi of the Talmud, that he was about to die and he was crying. His nephew says to him, "Why are you crying? You studied Torah all your life, you did mitzvahs all your life, and you helped people all your life. And not only that, you never sat on the court because you didn't want to meddle in people's lives. And you never enforced the law because you didn't want to take responsibility. You always wanted to be above reproach." So he says to his nephew, he says, "You don't understand. That's exactly why I'm concerned. Since I am the one who had the capacity and the capability to adjudicate and enforce laws, and I did not, that exactly is me the claim against me. Since justice is so integral to society and to existence, and the Jew is obligated to guarantee that that system is in place. So if I failed, I am the one who's fully culpable. For that reason, the Jewish people are the caretakers of the world. We have the temple. When we're in good standing, the whole world is in good standing. The fallout of our misbehavior affects the whole world." There's a famous word from Yisrael Salanter. When the Jew speaks Lashon Hara in Vilna, another Jew violates Shabbos and Brisk. Meaning, our behavior has global ramifications. A person's a polluter. A person has a chimney spewing all kinds of carcinogens into the air. And somebody says, "What are you doing? You're a polluter." He says, "What are you talking about? My chimney is over my property. I have air rights. It should go straight up." The person says, "You know something? when that your pollution goes straight up, there's a wind that carries it and spreads it across the whole country. Everybody is being impacted by your pollution. The Jew, when he misbehaves, the ramifications and the consequences of that misbehavior infuses in all existence something which is impure. And that impurity compromises all existence. And it dulls the sensitivities of humanity. So why is there Chil Hashem in the world? Why is God's name being disgraced? Because if we don't toe the line as we should, and we're not sensitive to God as we should be, there's less clarity in the world. And if there's less clarity, there is greater context for God's name being desecrated. But if the Jew himself, as a whole, behaves as he should behave, as Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ki chochmaschem b'neschem ne'inamin. It is your wisdom and your insightfulness in the eyes of the what? Of the nation of the world. They will revere you. They will extol you. They will see you as being special. Why? Because there's something that touches a person's soul. You have certain nerve endings that they're only touched only if the world is spiritualized. And if it's not spiritualized, they have no appreciation of what it is. So why is there less spirituality in existence? It's only because the Jew is infusing less spirituality into existence. And that's why, if you see another Jew doing the wrong thing, and you have the ability to intervene and to prevent the Jew from doing the wrong thing, what you have, and a person turns a blind eye, the person who could have intervened and did not, he has a level of liability for not intervening with the other person. That's only if you could. Why? God says, if you're my advocate and you're my faithful servant, and you could have prevented my name from being disgraced, how do you stand by and let it happen? What does that say about the person? What are you concerned about? You live selfishly, not selflessly. You don't live, we all believe many things. When there's a litmus test, very often we fail. I'll give you an example. The things we can't do, which Jews at one time could do. Rav Chaim Brisker, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, that all the Torah that's learned in all yeshivas throughout the world, the analytical process was established and created by him. The approach of how to understand advanced Talmud. And he was a man who was, you can't describe what kind of genius he was. And he was a person who was a Jew who became an apostate. And he came to Volozhny Yeshiva. Volozhny was the famous Torah Academy, little town in Lithuania. And it was established by Rav Chaim Volozhin, the primary student of Vilna Gaon. And he was selling books. And the books were heretical works. Would you imagine he had the audacity to bring it to the yeshiva, to sell these books of heresy to the students? So one of the people became aware of this, and he went to Reb Chaim Brisker and said, by the way, this Jew who's an apostate selling these books. So he says to him, send them to me. I want to see him. Tell him the great rabbi wants to see him. So Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, if you ever look at pictures, the way the houses were built in Europe in the 1800s, the rabbi would live on the top story, and there was a staircase with about 60 steps, one straight flight of steps straight up. Take a look in Vishniak, he has pictures in his book. He's the photographer who photographed the pre-World War II, the ghetto pictures and all that. And this person trudges up the steps with two bundles of books. And Rav Chaim Soloveitchik says to him, "Can I see one of the books?" He gives him one of the books. He goes and he turns the number of pages, and he sees it is what it is. This man definitely is selling heretical information, material, and the person's holding these two bundles of books in his hands. 70 steps till you get to the bottom. And he's holding, and he smiles to Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim Soloveitchik does to him. He gives him a push. Tumbles down 60 steps to the bottom. Why? Because this man is what we call a pursuer. He's a rodef. This man, by attempting to sell this kind of information, peddle it, and destroy people's souls, he's the equivalent of pursuer taking people's lives. So Chaim Soloveitchik went, gave him one push. I mean, he wasn't killed, but he was injured pretty badly. The question is, I always ask myself, when I heard that story, could I do it? Could I do it? I don't think I could do it. The value of human life, and because of the way society impacted on us in the United States, there's the ethics and the morals and the sensitivities and everything else. Subliminally, we've been impacted very seriously. See, even the things intellectually we should do, we don't do. We don't do it. When my children were small, my father was born in the United States in 1920, and he was brought up within an environment, school of hard knocks, putting it mildly. And he went to yeshiva till the age of 10 because he was an orphan. Then he went to work afterwards. And when he was in yeshiva, there was a certain boy with him. Ultimately, he converted to Christianity. When he was older, I don't know how old he was. And I was visiting the Lower East Side where my parents lived from Baltimore. And my father's working with my two oldest sons, holding each one in each of the hands. And he walks under the Williamsburg Bridge and he sees on a soapbox this missionary with a New Testament in his hand, spouting the New Testament. My father looks at him and he sees, it's this guy. It's this boy he went to school with who became converted to Christianity. And he's on a soapbox. He's a man then about in his 50s. And he's spouting Christianity. So what does my father do? He coughs up a full mouth of phlegm, goes over to him, spits him straight in the face. And he used a number of choice words on him in Yiddish. And he says, you haven't changed. This guy didn't know what hit him. It's more than pigeon droppings. So when I heard the story what my father did to this person, could have I done that? I would have maybe said something to him, but to do that, you'd say, how do you do that to a human being? To soil him to such a degree? How do you do it? These people were brought up in a different era. That Judaism wasn't only in their heads. It was part of their fabric. This is who you are. This is what you're spouting. This is what you want to impress upon other Jews. This is what you've become. It's unacceptable. I can't tolerate it. And that's why he reacted. The Jew himself, if he sees God's name being desecrated, you have to intervene because God's name is being disgraced. And therefore, if you have the ability to stop it, you have to stop it. You don't have the ability, you don't have the ability. There's no accountability to the person. But if you do, I prefer to mind my own business. You never know, he may get angry at me. He'll be upset with me. There'll be repercussions to me. He has the ability to hurt me financially. So, and therefore what? Therefore let God's name be disgraced because you'll be hurt financially. It doesn't cut the chase, as they say. It's not justifiable. It's unacceptable. Therefore, there's culpability for the person. The judicial system was given to us at a level we can't rely on probability. It has to be credible evidence beyond any doubt, gone through a fine-tooth comb, interrogation. The witnesses are definitely credible, beyond any doubt. Only then does the court have a right to render a verdict and to deliver a decision, even for a penny. Because God says, what you say and what you do and what you decide determines whether this world exists or not. If you don't want divine justice, we need human justice. But if there is no human justice, because you were careless and you were corrupt, There has to be divine justice. And if there is divine justice, God forbid, then there's no existence. Therefore, the liability to the court, to the judge who doesn't behave properly and act with integrity, God says, I will take your soul for that reason. Therefore, appointing a court that's not appropriate, it's like taking an idolatrous tree and planting it right next to the altar in the sanctuary. That's what it is. Why? Because the Talmud tells us that when the judges rule, God convenes with them. They see through God's eyes. But if you guys are corrupt, you people are corrupt, those eyes are so jaundiced. God wants nothing to do with you people. You people are the equivalent of planting an idolatrous tree right next to the altar. You want to be associated with God. You want God to convene with you. This is blasphemy. And because it's blasphemy, and that's what the Torah says in this week's portion, and if you do appoint the court which is not appropriate or qualified, it's like planting the idolatrous tree right next to the altar. We will continue.